Hi, I'm Jonathan Weinberg. Today I'm going to talk fairly briefly, I hope, about the Lamy Emporium, which sometimes people say is the flagship pen that Lamy makes. Um, it's I think a very beautiful pen, but it doesn't get the greatest reviews online. It doesn't seem very popular, at least in the United States. It's interesting. It was designed by a very famous architect designer, Mario Bellini, who's Italian and has won countless of awards, and particularly well known for working on doing redesigns of buildings, reconceptualizations for museums. For example, he did or extensions. He did the Islamic department at the Louvre. Other really interesting kinds of projects, and also he is famous for his designs for Olivetti that go all the way back to the 1960s. He's born in the 30s. I feel often with Lamy that you're getting pens that are completely rethought or reconsidered, and they really are works of art. People tend to then associate that with the Bauhaus, and I've said this before, that Bauhaus is a kind of catch-all that people use for anything that is modernist or I suppose German, and the notion of form following function, which is supposed to be a Bauhaus idea. I'm not sure that Lamy's design philosophy necessarily follows that. I don't think there's anything that would make this pen, for example, particularly noted for its functionality. It functions and it's elegant and beautiful to look at. I would say that. Um, but you can't say that, for example, the way the section is created is the best way to do a section, because some people might feel that it's bumpy. And the fact that often in its design practice, they simplify the design so that the shape is very both classic but minimal, is not necessarily the best function for design. And that's one of the interesting things about fountain pens. I mean, you could say, well, the best way to design a fountain pen is to make it cigar shaped, or the best way, like a Mont Blanc. So many fountain pens are cigar shaped, right? But that's really boring. And one thing I think you have to say about Lamy is their designs are not boring. I think at their best, they're both beautiful and functional, and sometimes the aesthetic can get in the way of the function, or maybe sometimes the two things can work together. Um, anyway, I think this is a very beautiful pen. Here is it under, so you can see it a lot more closely. It's this beautiful black color. It's coated with a PVD coating, which they claim is very tough and hard to scratch. Um, Otherwise, it looks like it could easily scratch. And there are three different finishes for this pen. Two that are in this black color but have different trim, and then there is a titanium version. Um, One of the things that's interesting about this pen is actually it's based on a design that Lamy introduced some 20 years earlier called the Persona, which Bellini also designed. And so this is a somewhat modified version of that. Lamy stopped making that pen. It has a very different kind of nib. And hopefully at some point I'm going to have one of those. And there are some comparisons online, people who compare the two pens. I'm not going to do that here because I don't have one of the earlier pens. I would say that one major difference between them is a difference between the clip, but the nibs are different. The Persona has a very unique, well, it's not necessarily a unique nib, but it's a nib that is different from other Lamy pens. It wraps around the pen. In some ways, it reminds me of the new Schoen design Monarch nib. In this case, the nib on the pen is a variation on the standard Lamy nib. This one is in black and gold and is 14K, however. But you could, I believe, slip this one off and put it on a Safari if you wanted to do that. It seems like that would be overkill. What's controversial in this pen is the fact that it has this kind of column shape with the ribbing that goes this way, and then at the section the ribbing goes that way. I think that looks really cool, and it's a beautiful, beautiful thing. Some people think that it should just be the same all the way through, and that this is a kind of interruption. I think that's the whole point of the design. You would think, however, that this would be uncomfortable, but actually it's quite pleasant. I like the way it feels because it's been done so beautifully and so smoothly. If the pen has any problem to it, I would say is that it is quite heavy. Although I find the whole material of it quite pleasant to use, but if I perhaps was writing pages and pages and pages with this pen, I might find that it is too heavy. It does post, and of course that makes it even heavier, but the cap isn't so heavy, so it actually doesn't unbalance the pen when you post it. It is not a piston filler, but it has a you can use it with a cartridge or a converter. And I'm a big fan of converter pens, but actually it's unusual, I think, or sometimes unusual when a pen is a flagship pen, that it doesn't have a piston filler. Now by flagship pens, this pen, I think it can list for as much as $600, but in practice, it probably you can get it for $400. I got it a just unbelievable deal on this pen. As you know, if you listen or watch this channel, I'm always talking about getting deals because I stay up in the middle of the night and I wander eBay, and somehow or other I find these things. So I was able to get this pen for under $200, which I just think is incredible. So that may have something to do with how much I like it, right? I'm not sure that I would pay anything like the list price of this pen, but I almost never pay the list price for a pen unless it's very, very inexpensive to begin with. It has a nice clip. It is, that is another difference. The clip is more simplified from the way the Persona has a much more complicated clip. And that may be to make it to make it more affordable. It's not a very affordable pen, but perhaps it is less expensive, or perhaps this is more reliable than the original clip that was on the Persona. Anyway, I think this is very elegant. One thing that I would say about this section is that it reminds me of one of my favorite books, which is Through the Looking Glass, and the design of the chess pieces or the illustrations by Tenniel of the Red Queen. This section sort of reminds me of that, and so when I use the pen, I would have to say that Through the Looking Glass is my most favorite book, and I read it probably once a year, and I think all wisdom is in that book. So any pen that unconsciously or consciously reminds me of that book is a good thing. In terms of comparisons, in terms of size, here's a Lamy Safari. And here's a Lamy 2000. And you can see that they're all very similar sizes. They all post. The Emporium is a screw pen. Okay, it's posted. It's quite long posted. So now I'm going to do a writing sample of the pen. I have the broad version. And this is Waterman. Intense black. It's very smooth. Nice and wet. I think these gold 14 karat nibs are quite nice, particularly in broad. They're not, they don't have a lot of line variation. They have a bit of a bounce and just a touch of feedback. I have to say though that I don't think they're quite as nice as the gold nib on the Lamy 2000, which is one of my all-time favorite writing pens. And it's interesting that Lamy doesn't develop other pens that are similar to the Lamy 2000. That's sort of its classic. I guess they feel they don't want to mess with that. And in terms of writing, as I say, it's a heavy pen, but the coating is very pleasant in your hand. I like the way it feels. I typically don't like big pens that are very, very heavy. Here we go. Quick brown fox jumps over the lazy dog. It's a very elegant looking pen, I think, when you write with it. Makes your hands look classy. And the broad is very pleasant. Now the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to do a drawing and watercolor it. Don't forget to subscribe. That's the way to support the channel, and I really appreciate it.